Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for beginning the discussion and overview of the 2019 Elementary Health and Physical Education Curriculum webinar. My name is Kristen Burfeld, and I'm a project leader with OPHEA. Please note that there is a chat room in the bottom right of the Adobe Connect room that you can use to ask questions as well as to receive some links for resources throughout the webinar. We will have a question and answer section at the end of the webinar for questions, so if we don't get to them throughout, we will address them at the end. We invite you to stand or move around throughout the webinar as we connect and learn together. We also invite you to follow along with us with the tour of the 2019 Health and Physical Education Elementary Curriculum through opening the link that we'll be putting in the chat box in the bottom right of your screen. This is the beginning of a webinar series to support the implementation of the curriculum. And we want to highlight that this first webinar will be focusing more on theory and information sharing, with upcoming webinars focused more on implementation. Today we will be hearing from Gail Lalonde, who is a registered social worker who completed both her BSW and her MSW at King's University College, Western University. Gail has worked in education for the last 18 years in a variety of roles, including as a frontline social worker, mental health leader, and supervisor of professional support services with responsibility for social work, psychology, and speech and language services. In her current role, Gail is the Director of Learning and Training for School Mental Health Ontario. In addition to her work at School Mental Health Ontario, Gail is a clinical supervisor at the Child and Youth Development Clinic at the Faculty of Education at Western University. We'll also be hearing today from Tanya Woods, who is an instructional program leader for K-8 for Health and Physical Education with the Halton District School Board and also sits on the OPHEA executive. She completed her Bachelor of Kinesiology at McMaster University and her Bachelor of Education at Queen's University. Tanya has worked for the Halton District School Board as an elementary physical and health educator for 16 years and an instructional program leader for the last 5 years. In her current role, she is responsible for all professional development related to the elementary health and physical education curriculum, elementary athletics, safety, well-being, and outdoor experiential education. We'll be hearing from Tanya first this evening. Welcome, Tanya.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We just want to get a sense of who is on the webinar today. So you can see on your screen that there's a little poll up there. If you could just take a couple of minutes to, or a couple of seconds to let us know who's with us today, that would be great. I see we have a lot of support educators for delivering and teaching the curriculum. A lot of teachers that teach their own phys ed as well as phys ed and health, as well as other health and phys ed at their schools. So thank you for being with us today. The goals for the session are to inform you on what has been updated, namely the social emotional learning skills and mental health literacy, what you need to know for implementation, and what resources exist for you, your staff, and parents. So here's the agenda for the webinar today. While we will be looking at the strands of the curriculum separately and focusing on what has been updated, specifically the social emotional learning skills and mental health literacy, it is important that we consider the curriculum as a whole. The vision of the health and phys ed curriculum is not new. So if you read through the vision here in the box, you will notice that it has simply been updated to include mental health and well-being. Please feel free at any time to write questions in the chat box on the right-hand side as well, and if we can answer them as we go along, we will. So we'd like to take a minute to have you type a response in the chat box. At the start of the school year, what knowledge and skills do you emphasize in planning and delivering your health and phys ed program that aligns with the vision? So Naz says growth mindset, emerging and developing, accomplished, acquired, safety, self-awareness from Pam. So safety, lots of safety coming in terms of emphasis on planning, emphasis on participation, cooperation, and safety skills. They're great. Growth mindset, participation from Laura. Mental health and well-being and physical literacy and activity from Contrusia, thank you. Establishing a classroom community and a sense of social emotional awareness amongst all stakeholders from TLDSB. Okay, thanks for sharing, everyone. The goals of the elementary health and physical education curriculum have remained the same, with the exception of the first goal. So you can see on this page here, there's the shift from living skills to social emotional learning skills and a more explicit connection to mental health. So the next two slides reflect these goals. You can see that the changes, you can see on the first one that there is the shift from living skills to social emotional learning skills, and that the other goals have all remained the same, with represented by the equal sign. So we're going to pull up a chat window where we'd like you to share words within the goals of the H&PE curriculum that resonate with you. So social, emotional, active, and healthy throughout their lives, resilience, social, emotional, well-being, positive mental health, critical thinking, positive mental health, building resilience, lifelong health, resilience, positive health and well-being, active and healthy throughout their lives. Thanks, Andrea. Resilience, enable them to enjoy being active and healthy. Thanks, Victoria. Okay, so we're just going to move on to the overview. The overview of the health and physical education curriculum, this image has not changed, other than the living skills have been updated to reflect the social emotional learning skills. The image is intentionally student-centered, showing how social emotional learning skills are embedded or integrated into all the other strands, so into movement competence, into healthy living and active living. The fundamental principles in health and physical education also have not changed. They continue to be important to understand and apply. And we want to consider things like maximizing participation in all of your students. Are you providing differentiated opportunities? Are activities reflective of students' diverse backgrounds? So the fundamental principles are something we want to take into consideration and apply when we're doing any planning around health and physical education. Together, the overall and specific expectations describe the mandatory learning of the curriculum. And in here, you can see that the breakdown of the different strands. The overall expectations outline the types of skills and concepts that are required for healthy active living at any age or stage of development. And for this reason, with the exception of social emotional learning skills and healthy living, the overall expectations are repeated in constant terms from grade 1 to 12. The specific expectations describe the expected knowledge and skills in greater detail and are grouped under numbered subheadings. So, for example, B2 would refer to Strand B and overall expectation 2. The diagram on page 23, so you can see this diagram on page 23 in the curriculum document, shows all of the elements that can be found on a page of curriculum expectations. So I just want to stress the importance or the difference between the examples and the teacher prompts. The examples are in parentheses and are meant to clarify the requirements specified in the expectation. Teacher prompts are meant to illustrate the kind of questions teachers might pose. So they can choose to draw on the examples and teacher prompts that are appropriate for their classroom, or they can develop their own approach, keeping in mind equity and diversity and the diverse backgrounds that we have in our classes, and as well as being age appropriate. So we can use the examples that are provided to us, or we can create our own. Updates to specific expectations. So the focus of the new curriculum has been on enhancing and updating, and the updates to specific expectations, you can see many of them right there. Mental health has always been embedded in the curriculum, and now in the 2019 elementary curriculum, mental health literacy is a new topic within the Healthy Living strand. There is new alignment with the new Canada Food Guide, which was released in January of this year. There's an all-gender binary approach, which was applied to the updates and specific expectations. And there are culturally relevant examples that have been included throughout the curriculum. As well, there were updates to teacher prompts and student responses as per the example that's on page 294. And you can see the example here on your screen. So Gail is going to be talking a little bit more about the overview of Strand A of the social emotional learning skills. So I'm going to pass it over to Gail.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about Strand A and the social emotional learning skills, and we're going to briefly touch on some of those key points related to the inclusion of SEL within the curriculum. But I want to also point out that we're not going to get too in-depth. There will be another specific webinar related to social emotional learning that's going to take place in late November. So we'll save some of the deeper learning for that one in particular. Really happy to see within the comments section there, as folks are making comments related to what resonates with them, what are they focusing on at the start of the school year. Many of those keywords that are coming up, resilience, respect, community, relationships, growth mindset, very clearly indicate a connection to social emotional learning skills. We know certainly from evidence and research that the development of social emotional learning skills supports kind of an overall sense of health and well-being for young people, but that it also connects to the ability to learn, build resilience, and thrive. So it's not only connected to mental health and well-being, but it has a direct connection to academic performance. You'll notice as you've looked through kind of those components and those sections of social emotional learning that there's actually a lot of similar content from the previously named learning skills. And there is a lot of similarities there. The update to include social emotional learning is really about providing that evidence-informed framework for application within Ontario classrooms, and of course with integration across all of these three strands. So we wanted to include an example of one of the expectations within the updated curriculum that relates specifically to social emotional learning. We've selected this one to highlight because it shows application of the learning in three different ways. So, and it connects across all three different strands. So to support program planning, most of the specific expectations in strands B, C, and D, it's important to note are also tagged to indicate the social emotional learning skills so that that integration can be, as we said, furthered right across. And you'll notice we're going to have an example a little bit later on in the PowerPoint that specifically highlights some of those tags, but you'll notice those as we go throughout the presentation. If any of you have taken the opportunity to go online and search up more information related to social emotional learning, you have very likely come across the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, which is CASEL. It is probably one of the most common sources of information and a very good source of information related to SEL, and one that we reference quite a bit. CASEL defines social emotional learning as the process through which children and adults understand and manage their emotions, how they set and achieve goals, positive goals within their life, how they relate to others and feel and express empathy, and then, of course, establish and maintain healthy relationships, make healthy decisions, manage, cope, all of those things. So you'll notice, again, the similarity in themes to some of those former learning skills. While there are several different models of social emotional learning, and we will go into this in a little bit more detail within the webinar in late November, within an Ontario context, they are specifically clustered in the following 6 categories: identification and management of emotions, stress management and coping, positive motivation and perseverance, healthy relationships, self-awareness and sense of identity, and critical and creative thinking. And that really came about, as we said, to really contextualize it specifically for our purposes within Ontario and within the Ontario education kind of context. And that was done in partnership, that was developed in partnership with the Provincial System Support Program at the Centre for Addictions and Mental Health. And we'll go into that a little bit more in the following webinar. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview of each of those 6 categories just to give a sense of what it is that we're talking about. And we'll look at very briefly a definition of each of those. We know over the course of a school day, and I'm sure that all of you have experienced this, but that students have strong fluctuations often in terms of their feelings throughout the day, and that as circumstances change within the day, so do their moods. We know from evidence that young people being able to recognize those emotions and being able to specifically name those emotions can really help them to better regulate their behavior and even be able to articulate what it is they're feeling, which ultimately has an impact on how they function during the school year or school day. So there's a number of different strategies that folks have used. I'm sure many of you use those quite regularly in your practice. In terms of stress management and coping, we know that students within Ontario, there's a broad range of sources of stress within the lives of young people, some of them big and some of them not so big, but relative to each individual, obviously having a different impact on how they manage. We know from evidence that learning to cope with those manageable threats over time as they grow and develop is critical for the development of resilience. I know a number of you mentioned in the comments there about the importance and your focus on resilience, so that's really important. And that strategies throughout the day, specifically obviously utilized through the curriculum, such as deep breathing, stretching, pausing, reflecting, are all strategies that obviously provide opportunities for young people to practice some of those skills and build that toolbox of coping. Positive motivation and perseverance is something that obviously allows young people to remain positive and focuses on the importance of maintaining that positive attitude. Folks referenced again in the comments about the growth mindset. There's a range of practices that fall within this category: expressing gratitude, optimism, perseverance, cognitive reframing, so changing how we think about or look at a problem. But we know that using these strategies on a regular basis in a variety of settings has a strong influence in terms of future outcomes for young people. Healthy relationships is, of course, something that you would recognize from living skills, and that really focuses on those positive interactions between young people, how they communicate with and amongst one another, that sense of belonging, inclusion, and positive emotion. That these skills kind of help folks with perspective taking, empathy, listening, assertiveness, conflict resolution, all of those things that, again, students build over time in relation to other people. Self-awareness and sense of identity, we know is very critical, that knowing who you are and kind of having that purpose and meaning in your life and staying true to that sense of yourself is something that has significant outcomes in terms of how an individual faces challenges as they grow and develop. Students kind of, as they develop that, begin to value their own uniqueness, become comfortable with kind of the expression of their own beliefs, values, opinions, all of those things, and are better able to kind of monitor their own progress and skill development, reflect on strengths, accomplishments, and share those with adults and other peers. And finally, critical and creative thinking, which again you will recognize, enables us to kind of make informed judgments and decisions. Students learn to question, interpret, predict, analyze, all of those things that help them make decisions. But this also includes executive functioning skills, helpful in the planning, focus, to retain kind of instruction and multitask over the course of their school day. Wanted to mention as well that you'll notice throughout the curriculum those tags related to social emotional learning skills. Similar to the tags that were used to cue integration of living skills within the 2015 curriculum, these tags are meant to reinforce those opportunities for learning related to SEL throughout and across the curriculum. There's many aspects of Strand A that are the same as what existed with the prior living skills, including individual skills, examples, concepts, all of those things that are similar. And while many of those kind of core skills, as we mentioned, remain the same, as we talked about, what has really been updated is that framework so that it is an evidence-based framework. It's important just to note that those tags are suggestions only, that depending on the context and how the expectation is being taught, the individual student needs, all of those pieces, that different social emotional skills might be selected to be integrated at that point in time. And that the important thing is really to be intentional on how we plan to use and where we plan to use and teach those social emotional learning skills. I'm going to hand that back over to you, Tanya.
Okay. So I'm going to be giving in the next few slides just a brief overview of Strand B, C, and D. So we're going to be looking at active living as the first strand, or Strand B, I should say. We know that in this strand, students are learning how to introduce more physical activity into their daily lives and how to take responsibility for their safety and the safety of others while they're being active. And many of you mentioned in the chat around safety as being part of your planning, as well as healthy active living, lifelong active living, that type of thing. So this is where active living falls into to all of those planning pieces. The three subgroups that are associated with this strand are active living, physical fitness, and safety, and with the social emotional learning skills, as Gail mentioned, integrated where appropriate. Daily physical activity also continues to be an important component of this strand, and as well, there's learning about concussions, which is also involved in this strand. And we'll talk about the concussion piece in some later slides as well. Oh, right here, sorry. So this is an example of one of the expectations for grade 1. So you can see that the relationships at the bottom as well, the integrated SELs has been put in there as a 1.4 as part of the relationship piece. So Strand B with movement competence skills, concepts, and strategies. In this case here, we can look, it continues to be organized into two subgroups. So one of them is movement skills and concepts, and the other one is movement strategies. So this strand hasn't changed in the 2019 curriculum piece, other than the fact that the social emotional learning skills have been embedded or integrated into the expectations where appropriate. So here's an example of what students can do. So here you can see where the social emotional learning skills have been integrated. So developing a sense of identity, learning to be aware of the impact of their emotions, learning to refocus, developing relationship skills. So these are how the integration piece is coming in from the social emotional learning skills into Strand B. Moving on to healthy living, can we just get a sense of how people are feeling with the updates in terms of comfort level? So these are in the healthy living strand, all the updates that have been enhanced or new learning on a variety of concepts. So take a look at the ones that are on the screen here and tell us how you're feeling about your comfort level in terms of maybe on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is being the most comfortable, 1 being the least comfortable with how you're feeling. I'm seeing lots of very comfortable with the updates, anywhere between 3 and 5. Seems we have a lot of folks with a high comfort level on the webinar, which is fantastic. Sometimes depending on the grade. Andrea is saying more interested in seeing what the how will look like. So that's great, yep. So grade specific, maybe not just over different grades. So depending on what grade you're teaching. So this webinar is the first in a series. I believe Gail mentioned that at the beginning of her slides. The social emotional learning skills will be the focus of the November webinar, and mental health literacy will be the December focus. So you can see here the mental health literacy is the new addition to our healthy living strand. This table shows how the specific expectations are organized around 3 overall expectations based on the application of health knowledge and the 5 content areas. I just want to bring attention to the 2 different approaches to instruction that you can use here. So in terms of vertical learning approach, looking at the overall expectations as the central organizing element. So if we're starting with understanding of health concepts, we can teach the expectations in all of the different topics using that overall expectation. The horizontal learning approach is instruction that would be organized by health content areas. So I think this seems to be a bit more of a, I know in Hull District School Board, I believe this is a little bit more common for folks to teach this horizontally, but the option to teach it based on the overall expectations is there as well. So Gail's now going to give you an overview of mental health literacy.
Great, thanks, Tanya. So when we talk about mental health literacy, what we're really talking about, of course, is the acquiring of knowledge and skills related to mental health content, concepts, all of those things. We mentioned earlier that we know that obviously mental health is an essential component of overall health, and statistically speaking, we know that 70% of mental health problems begin in childhood or adolescence. And so there's a growing focus and emphasis on needing to equip our young people with that knowledge and skills earlier, and scaffolding that over the course of their development so that they have opportunities to practice and integrate those skills throughout the course of their experiences, not only at school but at home and in the community. We know that educators are well positioned to obviously help students, and though they're not mental health professionals, that they are often the first to kind of notice and support students who might be struggling. We recently at School Mental Health Ontario undertook a provincial survey of youth, the Here Now On survey, which certainly you can find the results on our website, but really looked at what are young people's preferences for where they learn about mental health literacy and how they learn about mental health literacy, and very clearly young people felt the most comfortable learning about mental health concepts from their teacher, which some folks have expressed a little bit of surprise with, but the reality is those are the trusting relationships, as we know, that young people experience with teachers, and there's a safety and a comfort there in terms of talking about some of those things. So while there's obviously we don't want to put educators in the position of being, and there's no expectation that they're in the position of being counselors, that this is really about sharing information related to the content, the topic, as we would, teaching about concussion, or as we would teaching about cannabis use, or any of those other topic areas. We know, as I mentioned, that when we integrate mental health into curriculum, that this is just one aspect, that we're certainly not, we're not just simply focusing on this, but that this is part of a broader system of care, and that this is one way, and certainly the way that young people are expressing preference for learning about some of those concepts. And it certainly makes sense to teach some of those concepts in connection with the physical health concepts as well. It helps them, as we've talked about, make informed decisions about all areas of their health, and encourages them to lead kind of healthy, active lives. We know that the learning within that approach happens best within the context of a quote-unquote healthy school, and that curriculum is a significant component of the development of a healthy school. And all of you will be aware of, obviously, the Ministry of Education's Foundations for a Healthy School document, and those 5 connected areas: curriculum, teaching, leadership, or learning, school and classroom leadership, student engagement, social and physical environments, and homeschooling community partnerships. For those that might not be aware, you can certainly get more information. I believe that it will be posted in the chat as well, related to the OPHEA's Healthy School Certificate, to support that sense of shared responsibility and student engagement with the Healthy Schools Initiative. You can register by visiting the link that is in the chat box. So the question has come up sometimes as well in terms of why include this in curriculum. We know, as we talked about, when young people learn to care about their mental health routinely, that they are more likely to reach out early when they are experiencing difficulties, and we've talked about the fact that they are often most likely to reach out to educators. Just to do a quick overview again, in terms of how these components integrate with each other. We started off with SEL. We've moved to the addition of the mental health within Strand D. And for those 3 kind of key areas in terms of what overall those changes are, those updates are for the curriculum, there are those new learning expectations, obviously that's focused specifically on social emotional learning, those that focus specifically on mental health literacy, and then those enhanced opportunities throughout the curriculum to make those connections between physical and mental health. Within the mental health literacy area, there are some key learnings that we focus on that are scaffolded over the developmental phases throughout the grades. One being that understanding of mental health as being a part of our overall health, a really important concept within mental health, which is that interconnection between our thoughts, emotions, and actions, learning ways to care for ourselves, so recognizing sources of stress, being able to manage our emotions and cope positively, and then also recognizing sources of support and where we can go for help. You'll notice across the curriculum that there are concepts that are introduced in earlier grades and then are scaffolded and reintroduced later on with a little bit more of a developmental complexity, so that folks are actually learning to apply those as they get older and scaffold that learning across the years. We have an example of one of the mental health literacy expectations here on slide 43, and the following 3 slides are actually related to this expectation, and this is a really important area of enhancement, and I'm going to highlight why we've got these 3 slides going a little bit deeper. So this is an example of an expectation related in the area of mental health literacy. The inclusion of mental health as a separate topic in Strand D is really to make it more explicit and intentional. So folks have said that was always the intention, obviously, which was true, but we were certainly hearing from folks that it wasn't having that kind of very explicit focus. And so this is an effort to really be able to support that intentional and explicit integration. This concept, in terms of thoughts, feelings, and actions, as I mentioned, is quite central to the development of positive mental health for young people. So it's an example of one from what I just mentioned that is reintroduced later on. So we revisit this concept in the curriculum in grade 6. So there's an opportunity to kind of reinforce in developmentally appropriate ways. This learning differs specifically from the social emotional learning skills that we talked about earlier, in that it's content knowledge for students to learn and understand. It's important, obviously, for educators to help students understand how them having an understanding of that connection between their thoughts, emotions, and actions impacts not only their own functioning, but those around them within their that social context throughout the course of their education. The teacher prompts and student responses, as we mentioned, are optional, but are you'll notice with some of the more complex concepts, such as the key concepts, such as the interaction between thoughts, feelings, and actions, there are more teacher prompts and student responses. And that really is just a guide to provide folks with examples if they are looking for starting points for how they can engage in those conversations or that teaching within the classroom. Finally, the enhanced integration of learning related to physical and mental health. This is an example where we would look at a pre-existing expectation, but ways in which we've strengthened it across the curriculum. As we mentioned previously, the prior the expectation in the earlier curriculum would have stated specifically just good health. But that we have made it more explicit by breaking that down and saying good physical and mental health. So to really be able to be explicit. And the additional examples also related to mental health kind of deepen that learning throughout the integration of SEL. And you'll notice again, specifically the tagging at the end of this expectation, A1.3 motivation, and A1.6 thinking, so to provide some examples of where you might see some of those social emotional learning skills that are integrated across. I don't know, Tanya, at this point, if you have any examples that you might want to share in terms of how educators are already kind of teaching this way, just to kind of articulate this kind of continuation across the curriculum or integration across the curriculum isn't a drastic shift, but one that we know that many educators are already doing in their practice.
I think that a lot of teachers are already doing this. So the enhanced integration of learning, it's been happening for a long time. I think that it would be good to hear from some of the folks that are on the line in terms of what they're feeling this way. I know that the fundamental skills that we already talked about with the 5 fundamental skills, and then we're looking at the social emotional learning skills. I think that they kind of complement each other a little bit. They bring out in each other, So the fundamentals of H&PE bring out the SELs by nature. And so I think the physical and mental health piece is already happening in classes, but I'd like to hear from some folks around what their thoughts are on this. So it'd be great to see some comments in the chat group. So just in terms of some considerations for program planning and health and physical education, there are lots of great materials beginning on page 52 of the curriculum document. There are various updates that were made to division overviews, to the assessment and evaluation, the achievement chart, the glossary, and lots of updated definitions in the glossary. Also some updates to the appendices, so the various references within the appendices that are starting on page 291, that can be very valuable to teachers. So Appendix A, B, C, and D, you can see there. So I would encourage you to take a look at page 291, and as well as page 52 of the curriculum document to be able to see some of those considerations for planning and what's available to you in terms of resources. So you're going to see 3 chat pods up on your screen, and we'd like you to respond to one or to all of the questions if you would like. Looking at what you would like to learn more about, what additional supports would be helpful to you, and what have you done so far to implement the 2019 H&PE elementary curriculum. So we have some folks that are in the middle of typing here. We've got that in terms of implementing 2019, that we've used the updated OPHEA lessons, looked at examining the new pieces or the updated pieces, the use of the food guide. Andrea says, I would like to see what the health and PE curriculum looks like with the changes with SEL, and would like to see videos perhaps where we see it done in action. What does program planning look like? What does assessment and evaluation look like? What does questioning look like? So these are things we'd like to learn more about. We've got Laura from Rainbow District, concrete ideas for teaching. What could this look like? What are some strategies for implementation? More lesson planning on social emotional learning. So it looks like a lot of learning more about SEL. So that's great for the webinar that will be happening in November. What additional supports? So looking for some assessments and rubrics, useful picture books for intermediate for teaching mental health, teaching lessons and units. Where do students with disabilities and special needs fit in with the changes on SEL? So students who are nonverbal, students with ASD, and how do we address SELs with this group? So that's a great question in terms of additional support. Videos of teachers modeling best practices, how best for public health to support educators. So lots of great questions, lots of great pieces that you folks are entering into here. So thank you for sharing.
Sorry?
Yep, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm wondering if this is an appropriate time, just given the specific nature of some of the requests for resources, it might be for me to touch on some of the things that will be coming in the next month, specifically related to SEL. So a number of different resources are going to be released in the next few weeks. One very specifically is a 6 one-hour module online learning course from School Mental Health Ontario that has been developed in collaboration with Ontario educators, and it is specifically tied to the health and physical education curriculum. So to ensure that the topics are consistent with what is in the curriculum. So that offers everything from kind of background and evidence to more concrete, as you mentioned, kind of ideas for how to actually implement that in the classroom. In addition to that, and attached to the course are a variety of supplementary resources that will be helpful in terms of teaching. One in particular I wanted to mention, just seeing a lot of those comments, is that we do have a mentor text resource, which is a collection of books that can be used with young people that span right through from grade 1 to grade 8 on a range of mental health topics and related to social emotional learning, with attached lessons that can be implemented and some guided suggestions for how they might be used in the classroom and used with activities. In addition, there is the Everyday, for those that aren't familiar with the Everyday Mental Health Guide, this is a project that has been undertaken provincially in collaboration with the teacher federations. So the ETFO resource, there's a website, the Everyday Mental Health in the Classroom, which is specifically related to the social emotional learning skills and activities and suggested practices in the classroom that will tie in to those. And the OPHEA resource is currently in the pilot phase, but will be released more broadly shortly shortly. So they will assist you. I see some folks have also commented on specific programs per se, and the purpose of these resources is to allow folks to be able to apply those components within the classroom without having to necessarily purchase a program that in some cases can be quite costly, and that are specifically targeted for and linked to Ontario curriculum. So you can certainly, we will be sharing those over the course of the remaining webinars as well about where you can access and get that information.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Tanya. So we have moved into the additional resources slide here. So as Gail mentioned, we will be adding in the chat the link to the School Mental Health Ontario website there. And that's where some of those resources that Gail was sharing will be available. We also wanted to highlight the first two links on the slide here, just for the Ministry of Education website. So you can find curriculum and supports and such as the parent information sheets at those links. So we'll be adding those into the chat as well. And then we also have the Ontario Association for the Support of Physical and Health Educators, or OPHEA. And we just wanted to highlight that, if you aren't already, to be following along with them on Twitter and stay connected. And the link to their website is also there. As we've mentioned throughout the webinar tonight, we will be looking at the social emotional learning skills in a little bit more depth, as well as focusing in on implementation and what that looks like. So we will be sharing examples of what it could look like in lessons, games, activities, and strategies to support embedding it in your teaching practice. And so that will be, we'll be sharing information about that through our website as well as our monthly e-connection. And that will be something that we're looking at doing late November. So stay tuned for more information on that and some registration. I know in some of the chat features, it was mentioned about the OPHEA lesson plans. We do have the link there for subscribing school boards. And we also wanted to highlight that earlier this week, we did release curriculum expectation charts for each of the grades, where you can find the material to meet the expectations you're looking to teach through those lesson plans. And throughout the school year, we will be adding more lesson plans, new lesson plans to the website, so the Teaching Tools website there. And we, earlier in September, we did also release our new healthy eating lesson plans that connect both to the curriculum and to the new Canada's Food Guide that was released in January of 2019. And we're just going to take the last few minutes of our hour together in this learning opportunity to see if you have any remaining questions. Anything that we don't get to answer today, we will be looking to address in a follow-up blog that we'll be sending out to all folks in late November. So if you'd like to add your questions into the chat box, we can look to go through some of those. So we'll just give you a couple minutes to do that. All right, so we have our first question here from MR. Tanya, I'm wondering if you would like to jump in on this one. So the question is, how do you address the common notion that phys ed class is basically sports camp, and that parents surprise at report cards when they see their child is good at sports, so why don't they get a good mark? Do you have any experience with these types of situations that you'd like to speak to?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the fundamentals. I think it's looking at the overall piece again, not just looking at that one specific movement competent piece. It's looking at the overall in terms of how everything is all integrated into active living, movement competence, SELs. It's that whole fundamentals piece altogether. So just because they're good at sports doesn't mean that their mark is going to reflect that if it's not an overall curriculum piece. So I think I don't see it very often. I don't have a lot of teachers that seem to or parents when I was in the classroom that came to me with that. But usually I referred back to the fact that the curriculum's not just about movement competence, so it's about so many more pieces to it. And now looking at those living skills at the time and now the SELs, I think it's an overall piece that they have to look at, not just one strand.
That's great. Thank you, Tanya. And I also just wanted to highlight, it looks like Karen has also given some answer or some notes on that one. So parent education of our subject, sharing, a website or monthly newsletter to send home, and including the parent link that was shared with parents to help ensure that information is being shared, and that can be kind of a jumping off point for that conversation. And we just see Andrea agreeing with Karen's comment there that families need to see themselves in the curriculum and understand what students are learning. So opening up that conversation and working together with that. So we will stay on the line for a couple more minutes, but we just wanted to highlight the Survey Monkey link in the chat for you to respond to. We appreciate your feedback, both on supports that you need to continue to implement the curriculum, but also just on the experience of the webinar tonight. We do take that feedback, and we will be using that to inform the planning of future webinars. So please do take the time. And I also want to take this opportunity as we wait for a few more questions in the chat to just thank our participants for joining us, for sharing your ideas and for learning with us. And I also want to thank Gail and Tanya for your support, your expertise, and your time that you shared with us tonight. Tanya, it looks like we have another question in the chat from MR. Do you have any redirection strategies for teachers to help ensure that students are acting in a safe manner for themselves and others?
Okay, so sorry, I'm not 100% clear here. This is if the student is being unsafe within their classroom, within the gym?
Yes.
What are some appropriate, if any? I really just think it's going to depend on the setting and the student and what's actually happening within the class in terms of how you can redirect. It's going to be very student dependent on what you're going to do in these situations. I think it would really, I feel like I don't really have like one answer for that. I think it's really student dependent on how you're going to approach that situation.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Tanya. And I'd say anybody who's still on the line, if you want to add any suggestions for your experiences with this as well, feel free to add those in the chat. We'll be on the line for another minute or two. So any additional questions or recommendations that you have for some of the questions we've had as well, please do use the chat box for that. All right, and just an idea from Andrea around knowing your learners. So connecting with the homework teacher, other teachers with other classes or subjects to see if that's happening in those environments as well, and determining what the triggers are for the students. Daniela, if you sign up for our monthly eConnection newsletter and follow us on Twitter, we will share information about registration for future webinars that way. And we'll just add the link to sign up for that monthly newsletter in the chat box. So we are going to close out for the day. We are at our hour, so I wanted to thank you all for your questions, your recommendations, and sharing different strategies with one another. We will like to continue this, as well as answering any questions we didn't get to today through our follow-up blog. So stay tuned. We'll email that out to all webinar registrants. And thank you again for your time and the opportunity to learn with one another. So thank you to the participants, and thank you, Gail and Tanya, again.